Is it okay if I record our conversation?
That's just fine.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate you doing this because we were kind of going back and forth in the comments of some Facebook threads, and I know we don't totally see eye to eye on this issue, but I thought we could kind of talk through it, but also maybe just do some like community modeling of how do you discuss things and talk about them even when you disagree. And so I just really appreciate you always being willing to communicate, even though people are disagreeing with you, or, at least you show up and kind of say things out loud. So
I'm happy to do so.
So how should we do this? What's the most productive way to talk about this ordinance and to be civil with one another and to model that we understand where we're coming from? Do you want to go through the article I wrote? Do you want to more tell the background from your perspective? Like, how do you feel is the most effective way to communicate these things that are going on at this public level? How do we talk about this?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. I think clearly based off of the amount and quality of discourse taking place publicly, talking about issues is important. And maybe that's the philosophy major in me that likes to get meta with everything and overcomplicate things. But I really have reflected a lot on communication and how we work through conflict and disagreement, especially publicly. When it comes to public policy, it doesn't take much to have read the newspaper over the past year or so and seen two particularly controversial issues that have faced the city of Rock Island. One being the potential development at the Casino West site next to the Milan Bottoms, and then now the situation regarding homeless shelters and related social services in downtown Rock Island, where there's been enormous public participation and controversy regarding these issues. And really, it's unfortunate because both issues, it's the same dynamic. And anybody who spends a little bit of time on social media sees this take place, where people disagree, they get into their camps, and there's not a lot of listening taking place, and just a lot of lobbying arguments or even attacks between the two sides, and then we don't really have anything. We just have people entrenched in their positions and arguing. So I've been thinking a lot about how to better manage conflict when it comes to public government and policy and discourse. Last week, Wednesday through Saturday, I spent some time up in Chicago at the Illinois Municipal League annual conference. The city of Rock Island regularly sends older people and some staff to the Illinois Municipal League annual conference to learn about local government, municipalities in Illinois. And I sat in an interesting presentation from a PR firm that talked about conflict management around controversial issues that affect communities. And so it was very timely and interesting stuff. I mean, really, I get frustrated from these situations because, like in all conflict, whether it be within a family, within sports teams, within a city, it really, to me, it comes down to, like, we all don't share the same narrative, and we all don't share the same experience and perception of what's going on. And, that's based off of a lot of things that we bring to issues and conversations. But we are all just so convinced that our perception is right and our feelings and reactions to our perception is right. And, if we could just convince the other side to see how they're wrong, then we would have, utopia, and everything would be right in the world. But unfortunately, that's not how humans work. So I'm...
And it's the only structure that's been established for public discourse. So you have, your city council, if we just keep it at our tiny Rock Island level, so we don't get overwhelmed by the national or the, you have your city council, so you have your deciders, and they're your representative. They're getting influenced from their constituents and trying to represent, your ward in the city. And you have people who are trying to tell a story or create change, and they can email you, they can call you. You can have behind the scenes conversations. People come to city council to say out loud, here's what I think, this is what I want. People write op-eds. There's conversations had on social media, and it's also disjointed. And what is brought to city council, a lot of times city council can't really respond, so there's just silence there. City councilors might be having meetings with one group or another group, but the public is not privy to those. And so our avenues for public discourse and really wrestling with decision making and wrestling with how we understand one another's narratives, and we don't have spaces to do that. We can't watch people doing that. So we could hear a meeting went on over here, something was said over there, but as a public, we're not in the loop. We don't know what's going on. And so I totally agree with what you're saying, that narratives are crafted, that people get siloed, different perspectives are held, but where in the city of Rock Island do we get to really have public discourse where an alderperson can discuss with someone, or groups of people can come together to talk about difference of opinion? We don't have a lot of avenues for that.
Yeah, I've tried to pursue some of that through my Reddit AMAs. I did a big AMA, Ask Me Anything, on the Mylan Bottoms issue. And then when the homeless shelter issue came up, I did another AMA on Reddit. It's just so hard because even the AMAs, people come away with different narratives and perceptions, right? I mean, I have a core of constituents that say, gosh, I really love it how you're so public and transparent and accessible, and you get on Reddit and you have these long explanations of what's going on and why you have the opinion that you do, and it's just so appreciated and so valued. And then I have other constituents that are like, you got to post less online, you just stir the pot, you just get people upset. And so there's these, again, just two different perceptions of the same thing, where it's well, even in the attempt to have dialogue, people take away different perceptions from that experience and either support it or don't. I do like
my experience, though, is because I walk in these two worlds. I walk in worlds with a lot of power and privilege, and I walk in worlds trying to give voice to and support communities that don't have power. And I notice a difference in, if you hold power, you don't have to have public conversations, and you can really have background conversations with lots of people. And it's almost like if you already sit with a lot of influence, you have nothing to gain and everything to lose by speaking. And so my guess is your constituents who already hold power are like, stop it, Dylan, you're just stirring the pot. People who don't have power and don't have access to the same ways to pull the levers are often the people who have to be vocal, create commotion, because those are often the only avenues that they have. And I kind of exist in both worlds. And so it's just, but I'm sure maybe you have before too. Do you notice it's the people who are I have nothing to lose and everything to gain with my silence, are often the exact opposite group of people who are I have to scream at the top of my lungs to try to be seen and heard. Do you notice that?
I'm not sure that is my experience. The homeless shelter issue in downtown Rock Island, I have a number of, one of the narratives that's been crafted about the issue has been it's homeless people and homeless shelters versus the downtown business community. And I've tried to be very intentional in highlighting it's not just the downtown business community that voices these concerns to me. I have residents of Sala Flats and other, income restricted apartment buildings in downtown Rock Island. I mean, those are certainly not people that we typically think of having influence and power, that privately call me, email me, and say, hey, I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate, these are my concerns. These are my issues. And so they don't necessarily, come to City Hall and do public comment. Really, again, returning to the homeless shelter issue, the distinguishing thing that I identify as to whether one is vocal and public versus private and side conversations is really which side of the debate one is on, and a deep aversion to receiving criticism for one's perspective. Overwhelmingly, the people who want to have private conversations with me communicate a desire to not do so publicly because they are afraid of the public criticism that they'll receive for having the opinions that they do.
Well, so maybe we could shift into really talking about this issue. Like, it sounds like we've identified that having public conversation is difficult, that everything is done in silos, that a group of constituents with a certain perspective talk to you, but might not feel comfortable talking in the broader, public square. So what if we just kind of shift into talking specifically about the moratorium, the ordinance, and, you and I don't see eye to eye on this issue, so we might be able to model some of that and just work through it, or model, like, how do we listen to each other? How do we find commonality? How do we, and I don't know the best way to organize that. We could go based on the article I wrote, and we could do what we did through email, kind of talking about chunks of it. I'm open to.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I have identified there's a real aversion to being vulnerable publicly, whether that's like one's own personal, like, I just don't like sharing my feelings kind of a thing, or a sense that that's not appropriate for this sort of, government, professional, whatever, subject. People have like opinions and positions that they communicate, but I really identify that people are just not, they don't start from a place of vulnerability, and that vulnerability, I think, is what invites other people to empathize with oneself, and then that's where you can have connection and being able to talk about, kind of what's underlying the issue. So
how do we model that? Like, how do I show up with openness and vulnerability, and how do you, even though we know we're kind of starting out in this place of opposition, how do you suggest we model that for people?
That's a very good question. It doesn't happen a lot, right? Well, yeah, we can
like, we use I statements, we own our own feelings, like that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, I think that is part of it. I found some of this sounds like I'm tooting my own horn, which I'm not trying to do, but just sort of identify how I've thought about this and tried to participate in it. Some of those public city council meetings, I have very explicitly apologized to social service providers because I do recognize the impact that something like the moratorium has on them. And, it's not comfortable to apologize. It's not comfortable to sort of acknowledge the impact that our actions have on others. We like to think of ourselves as good people and helpful. Every single person who runs for city council thinks that they're a good person that's trying to help people, right? And so often, again, whatever the conflict is, if somebody says, hey, what you did right there hurt me, a lot of people react with defensiveness and dismissing it, right? They just say, how many times in a city council meeting do I hear somebody say, well, I'm sorry if you felt that way, right? I mean, that's not really a genuine apology. That's putting it on the other person for having that feeling, instead of recognizing whether it was your intention or not, that the other person felt something based off of your action. So even though, I certainly do not intend to negatively impact other people, I tried to model it in city council meetings by acknowledging, yes, this has a negative impact, right? This does impact social service providers from being able to open, in the example of the moratorium, which then downstream affects unhoused people and the people that they serve. And for that, I apologized and tried to, own that and still be able to say, just because I acknowledge that and I apologize for it, doesn't mean that I have to change my position. But it does try to communicate that I understand that this is impactful and it does affect things, and that I'm listening to the other side, right? It's not just, well, you're wrong, but that I'm trying to listen. So, that's someplace that I've tried to start.
Yeah. Yeah. So trying to, I mean, just in having more conversation and trying to reflect back and, I'm like, but I want you to move over a little bit too, as you're recognizing the harm that might be caused, to say, how do we step back from the edge a little bit? But I think the fact that the ordinance was taken off the table for tonight is an example of some flexibility of like, this wasn't quite right, or we do need to. So that is a demonstration of flexibility, is having something on an agenda and then pulling it off. I mean, but we don't always see that. But so in that article that I wrote, and you and I have gone back and forth in email, and I guess my original position is that by setting up this ordinance that's really focused on homelessness services, that homeless people will experience harm. It could even be life-threatening harm, that it targets that specific population for their status as being unhoused, and that it will change, how extreme it was. It will change kind of the flavor of what it means to be a Rock Islander, that, part of our identity, even the thing Jack did downtown, like the word grit came up. We're resilient. We are a place for all people, that we take care of each other, that, and so I guess those were some of my initial concerns. Is I just think the ordinances, the way that they're currently written, are probably a violation of the human rights of people who are unhoused. There's so much in there, and just that it shifts or moves the goalpost for like, what does it mean to be a part of our community? And that for me, economic development is recognizing that even people who are unhoused are an integral part of economic development, that people who are struggling in a temporary moment, and of course they are, given the larger economy and, unemployment and poverty levels, that they are our assets just as much as a building or a structure is an asset. Those human lives are assets if helped with, to become a member of Rock Island's community that is contributory and part of growth. And so I see people as assets. I guess that's one piece of it for me. And I also see, in the shifting politics of our country, our state, our region, that Rock Island can really stand out from our own economic development place as a hub for ingenuity and social policy, for not saying we have to go with the status quo, or we have to totally, like an example would be, we got to get all the homeless people out of here because they're bringing down property values. Or we need to set up a paradise for people who are unhoused, where there are no rules and there's no, social contract with one another. That we need to tell a more interesting third story that will also attract like-minded people who want to live in a place like Rock Island, where we have a high poverty rate, where we have a lot of diversity, to become a part of this community. Not because we're trying to look like our neighbors down the road, but because what we're doing here is special and different. And we could, you can build up industries around, I mean, we're human services, we're insurance, we're healthcare, we're education, we're, why can't we become a place where it's like Nest Cafe? Like, it's such a perfect example of that third path, that we are creating something through social entrepreneurship that is cool here. And I am 100% on board with you that we need a regional approach, but I think the way we get the buy-in is we do something successful here, so that our sister cities aren't so afraid to follow our path. I think that's the better approach than saying, we're not doing it until you do it. I feel like it's just a stance of like, Rock Island is tough and we're gritty and we're caring and we can do this and we're going to come together. Not in a way that's like the brakes are off the car and everything's going to deteriorate, what people's anxious thoughts are about, if we do this, everything will go to shit. but we're going to do it in a different way. We're going to do it in the Rock Island way. And so I threw a lot in there, but those were some of the main points of that article, that I don't want to lose the spirit of Rock Island. I don't want to look like a different city. You know, I think that we have really cool qualities about who we are as a people, and I don't want to lose that. And I think that we can do something here that honors the dignity and human value of everyone who lives within our borders, and that can help people who are struggling become meaningful parts of the future of Rock Island, that can be civically involved, that can help shape policy, and we can take care of our businesses and lean into, like, they're hurting too. They need support. You know, 30% of people in downtown live in poverty, and I think it's like 46% of people in the West End. Those businesses are hurting because we don't have enough people in Rock Island who are doing well. You know, part of economic development is having people who live in your community who aren't suffering. Like, and it's not, I sat down with 3 homeless people today just to get a sense of things before this conversation. And the one guy is homeless because he had brain surgery 5 years ago, didn't have insurance, knocked him out of his job. He had a giant hole in his head. He couldn't get work. Like, he doesn't get any kind of cash assistance. He's 59 years old, so he's not at that Social Security age. Like, he said he would clean up poop if someone would pay him to do it. He'll do anything, but he is not competitive in the labor market of our economy right now. You know, but he is a valuable, meaningful person who could be a part of something in Rock Island if we shifted how we think about this. Not that homeless people are a burden and something that needs to be pushed off to another community, but that increasingly they are members of our society that reflect a deeper pain about this system we live in, and that we can work collaboratively with them, with social services, with business owners, so that Rock Island can be a model of, like, let's do something different. Like, let's tell a better story. Let's, you know, so there's all that, and the fact that I think the ordinance will not at all address the issue of people who are really, really suffering, who are breaking into buildings, you know, exhibiting symptoms of mental illness on the street. The ordinance won't really touch that, because those people most likely won't be, like, inside of a shelter, because their behavior won't allow that. So that was so many things, Dylan.
It really was. I'm not entirely sure where to start.
And we have had that email back and forth where we were really trying to, like, reflect back to one another. I hear you saying this. I hear you saying that. So just.
Yeah, we did. I tried my very best to listen and reflect back what you said, because I do believe sincerely that you have very many valid points, and points that I share. Trust me, it's not lost on me how I feel personally. I don't know if confused is the right word, but just sort of never 8 years ago when I started on city council, what I expect to be where I'm at today, just because my personal politics don't lend themselves to the positions that I've taken on city council. Ultimately, I believe that does come from experience, and not necessarily the the narrative of getting sucked into the machine and losing one's sense of identity and whatever, and just sort of playing the game, but rather more understanding that things are extremely complex and difficult and gray, that there's not a lot of black and white. And that's really where I come from, where, in trying to decide what to do. I mean, ultimately, I know my core values, and then I try to make decisions based off of my core values. The Quad City Times Dispatch Argus had a nice editorial in the newspaper on this past Saturday.
I read it.
Yeah, it was a little surface. They didn't really delve into.
Like, they weren't like, we don't have any ideas for you. We don't know how you do it, but it's hard.
But they did identify the way in which Rock Island is talking about and working through this issue, because this is an issue elsewhere in the Quad Cities. This is an issue obviously elsewhere across our country, but they did commend us for the way in which we're talking and working through this. And I think this very conversation that you and I are having demonstrates that, right? I mean, talking about the uniqueness of Rock Island and the identity of being a Rock Islander comes through in this very interaction that we're having, where it's like, okay, we are a community that has certain challenges and experiences unique to ourselves. Rock Island is more like a Chicago and a Detroit than it is a Davenport, a Bettendorf, a Cedar Rapids, and Iowa City, right? We really are, maybe East Moline is similar to Rock Island, but we really are a unique community in the Quad Cities, and our culture, our economics, our demographics stand out profoundly, in my opinion, within the Quad Cities. There's sort of this, the Quad Cities is this weird combination of like Midwestern, Iowan, Des Moines sort of thing, suburb development, and then a more legacy of, influences from Chicago and more Rust Belt industrial places, maybe more to the east. But the point that I'm trying to make here is trying to identify with you that like there are Rock Island values being expressed in what we're doing, and outside people are recognizing it, and they're encouraging other communities to have these conversations and to figure out what are we doing here. It's just like,
I agree with you. I mean, I think that's one place we share a lot of agreement is an identity of you can be free here, you can have freedom of thought, you can have, freedom of opinion, and we can somehow stay connected through our communication and resilience. And, so I do agree with you. I think that is a cool thing about Rock Island is let's keep talking, let's keep wrestling through this. Let's not get mad at each other and disconnect. So I think there we have a lot of agreement, and that would be really cool if Rock Island can do that in a powerful way. So well, 100%.
I thank you for being part of that. And like I've always told you, I love being on your podcast. I love being here doing this live stream or whatever we're calling it. The emails, the Facebook, I never feel like we are, arguing or attacking one another. We may disagree, but there's a real commitment to Rock Island and our community that we're not willing to sacrifice for, being right or winning the argument, for example.
I do get sometimes when we're done talking, I do feel frustrated though. I mean, I feel like, Dylan, you're a socialist. Like, how is this your perspective? And I'm not a socialist. So I think sometimes with you specifically, I'm like, sometimes confused. I'm like, I feel like if I read your biography and the reasons you got into politics, that on this issue of, homeless services, that taking into context the bigger economy, the rising rates of homelessness, the upcoming loss of social safety nets, that this is a social issue that is not going anywhere. And to stop humans from being able to care for one another because government's not doing it. So to stop loving people within a community from being able to care for one another just seems antithetical to what I would assume is your kind of spirit. I guess it just confuses me. So I do both listen and then I do walk away sometimes like frustrated. And then I have to be like, okay, go back in there.
Yeah, well, that's fair. Your feelings of frustration are valid. I don't doubt them at all. Again, I think I care about other people. It's just this narrative of who are we caring about in this moment? Because there are real conflicting, not mutually exclusive, or actually, yes, mutually exclusive, needs going on right now. And that's really where this gets hard. I've said it repeatedly in city council meetings that this is an issue where both sides have valid points. And earlier, when you were talking, you talked about like, we can't have all these homeless people downtown because it lowers property values. But I don't know I don't believe you've ever once heard me say that I support the moratorium because it's lowering property values.
Well, you said
Um,
that it has harmful effects on the neighborhood, like something
that's correct.
about homelessness has this harmful effect. So maybe we need to define certain things do you think Rock Island currently today, if you took the temperature, do we have an overwhelming, or what, on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being there's zero issue to 10 being the worst issue you can imagine, where do you put our homelessness problem or issue in Rock Island today?
Well, I don't really understand the question. You mean like, what is the severity of people experiencing homelessness?
Or the issues it's causing for your ward and the neighborhood, 0 to 10, if you had to take the temperature of it today, where would you put that?
I mean, it's not the pictures of San Francisco that I see where there's tent cities and people, using needle drugs on the sidewalks or anything like that, right? We do need to be like mindful of how impactful, it could be much worse.
I would say it's a 3.
Yeah, I'd put it somewhere around a 5 or something like that, halfway there. I do know that I have constituents that are impacted by this daily, whether it be everything from somebody trying to break into their business to being asleep in their yard to, camped out along their building. I mean, it's daily that people communicate to me impacts of the unhoused.
And when they're communicating it, are they, because I've really searched for those people. Like I go out with a camera, I interview people, I try to get, I had a conversation 2 days ago where I'm like, can you just give me the names of 2 people? Like I just need 2 people that are still having concerns about this, that haven't been, haven't changed, or at least quieted since having deeper conversations with, and I can't find them. And I don't know if that's because when I'm going to them, they're knowing my perspective, and so they don't want to tell me. But I guess I'm just wondering, so if you had to put on a scale of 0 to 10, the concerns you're hearing, with 0 being neutral, like I drove around last night with my daughter and stopped random people on the street as people were going to the Augustana thing. And, do you experience a problem with homelessness downtown? The most I got was one of the gyms downtown was like, yeah, I mean, there's some homeless people around, but we never have a problem. And I've been doing this for about 6 weeks. So 0 to 10, how extreme are your constituents framing the issue for you? Like, is it a neutral and we know this is part of living in a major city downtown? Or is it like, this is an unsafe, horrible situation and we need drastic action?
Yeah, it's a spectrum. I get everything from people saying, yeah, there's homeless people downtown, it doesn't bother me, to people saying, you need to close all the homeless shelters. That's why I say that this is a compromise, is because proponents of social service providers, I don't know if they understand the position of some people where, I mean, the moratorium, it had impacts, but it didn't affect existing providers. But I've certainly received communications from constituents saying, I don't only just want the moratorium, I want you to close Christian care, get them out of here, right? So, I mean,
how many, if you had to rattle off some numbers, like how many people are we talking about that feel that strongly about homelessness downtown?
not a lot. They're the minority.
Like 2 people or 5 people or 12 people?
I'd say about 2 people. Again, that doesn't sound like a lot, but the number of people that are engaged in municipal politics that reach out to me about it. I mean, it's not like we're not talking about a huge sample size of people, right? We have a pretty small community. But they, like I said, they are the minority. I will say, it's hard to like put a number on these things. That seems sort of just arbitrary, but I have, people may not see it or hear about it, but over this entire time, from the introduction of the idea of regulatory framework for social service providers to then when the moratorium was introduced and the backlash and all of these private meetings that have taken place between me and stakeholders, between stakeholders and stakeholders, right? I mean, everybody's meeting with everybody right now. It's not just me, for example, but throughout the entire time, I have checked back with my stakeholders. I'm getting a phone call. I've checked back with my constituents who have communicated support for the moratorium, and said, okay, you've had conversations with the third place. I know that you've had direct conversations with Christie at the third place. Do you still feel like you need the moratorium? I know that you've had conversations with Project Now. Do you feel like you still need the moratorium? And they've told me, yes, I still feel like I need the city to put in the moratorium. So, it impacts them sufficiently that they still, even though they've had all of these conversations, they still would like the city to do a moratorium. So whatever numerical value of impact you want to put on that. But I kind of thought maybe when the moratorium was introduced and then it was tabled for a month, and then all of these side conversations happened, people got to understand what was being proposed at the third place. I kind of thought that the constituents that I have that were more for limiting these services might kind of say, nah, actually, I get it now and I'm good. I don't need that. But I have found that pretty much nobody's position has been changed. They still supported the moratorium and they support the regulatory frameworks for the social service providers, which has kind of surprised me.
What's the most important part to them of the ordinance? Like, what do they think in that ordinance is going to do for them? What is most important to them? What their deepest need that they're saying, what we really need you to respond to is this piece of it. What is that? What does it do to help them?
I think that there's two things. One, for those that have more strong opposition feelings regarding the unhoused, there is a desire to put a limit on the number, the centralization and the number of these services in downtown Rock Island. But more so that interests me, the second thing is basically a mechanism for the city to close down a provider if there are concerns about quality. With the licensing system, if there's concerns, if there's violations, whatever, the city can revoke a license and then the shelter has to close. And so there's an accountability measure there that my constituents do not feel exist for existing facilities or previous facilities. And so what I take away and what I'm as sort of the neutral third party here, right? I mean, I do live downtown. I live in a income-based rent-controlled apartment building. So like I'm right here with, I see homeless people outside my door too, right? So I do live this, but as sort of like because I'm in the role of the government here, trying to kind of mediate this tension, what I see as most beneficial coming out of this is that accountability mechanism, where if there are concerns about how a provider is operating, the city and the public through the city has a way to hold them accountable.
And I think that's where like some of our cross messaging is happening, or where you and I were, because I was thinking that this all stemmed from the visibility of homelessness. So
Right.
that, downtown, what people are really struggling with if they own businesses or if they are tenants or residents or they live downtown, was both the visibility of homelessness and then the severity of problems that a portion of homeless people experience. So I was coming at it from our core wound here, what we have a lot of pain around is homelessness. And so in my article, I'm framing everything off of that, and I'm working under some assumptions that more shelters, more rehab, more daytime places to use the bathroom, those things will reduce the pain to the tenants, the residents, the business owners, because people will be off the street. They'll have a safe, clean place to go. They can store their things so they can apply for jobs. They can get connected to healthcare. They can have, in my mind, when I've been framing this, I'm like, the core problem is homelessness. And we've got
the visibility of it. Yeah.
visibility of it and the underlying fundamental issue of it. And if we're looking at the most effective ways to actually solve that problem, we're looking at housing, we're looking at services, we're looking at, getting people off the street by getting them well. And
Correct.
making sure someone doesn't have to break into somewhere to use the bathroom because they have a place to use the bathroom. They
Right.
have, so in my mind, something like the third place will solve a lot of the issues for the downtown area. But when we were going back, you said back and forth, you said one thing where I think we were getting cross talking with each other was that you don't view the primary issue here as the homelessness. You view it as the communication between kind of stakeholders and people in Rock Island in the downtown area. Is that right?
The number one thing that I peg this issue on is concerns regarding the quality of social service providers. That's where this all started from. That is what continues to reverberate. It is not about the unhoused. It is about the providers. And that's why, the regulations being proposed here is regarding providers, not the unhoused. Now, obviously, I understand that affecting providers has a downstream effect where it can affect the population that they serve. But, that's been something that I've really tried to highlight is that, other communities are criminalizing homelessness. They're banning camping and all this stuff. And none
Illinois,
of that.
You can't do that anyway. Like in Illinois, you cannot, under the Homeless Bill of Rights, do those things. So Iowa could do that, but we're stuck with the laws and the framework of our state that we are not allowed to do that. So the city couldn't do that if it wanted to. I think it's in your ordinance you can't do if you want to.
There are other Illinois communities that have banned camping, right? So, I hear you, and I understand that there's the Illinois Homeless Bill of Rights, and I respect that law. And as we've communicated, I've double checked and triple checked with our legal team to make sure that anything that we're proposing here does not violate that law. But there are other Illinois communities that have. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that
they've been sued, and some of them have lost those lawsuits, one up to the tune of $587,000. And that would be a big hit for the city. Has to protect its, and we don't really have a camping problem. So why are we even talking about, we don't have a large scale camping problem at this time. So, but I guess I'm getting off track because like the solutions to homelessness lie, and I think we agree, in housing, in police officers enforcing illegal activity that's happening out on the street, in residents like landlords, and if someone's living inside of a building, the landlord needs to take the action to get that person out of there. Like there's all these things that are going to make an impact on the visible homelessness of the break-ins, the drug use in public, people with significant mental health issues that aren't engaged in services because maybe they don't have health care, all that stuff that's like really, if you had a triangle of the highest degree of need, that's the most visible, all of that probably its solutions, and a lot of it's going to lie outside of what this ordinance touches.
100%.
And so what you're saying is this ordinance is created to show the community, the business owners, that the city hears them, and that you are going to try to mediate through ordinance the quality of the social service providers. It's more of an ordinance written for communication or like mediation between people and the service providers, and it has less to do with the actual homeless people.
That is very much what I've been trying to say. Thanks for hearing me.
But is an ordinance targeting homeless people the right path to do the more difficult work of what you're talking about, which is providing spaces for people to communicate, to come to mutual understanding, to understand that in a society you're going to get maybe 7 out of 10 of what you want, but not 10 out of 10. Like, I don't know, because it seems like mean to homeless people to be like, these people with more resources all can't get along. And so the city is trying to help them with their communication and boundary setting, and so, but it's going to all happen on your back. I don't know.
I hear you. This is how we struggle with justice in our country, right? What does justice look like? If something criminal takes place between two people, they may have different perspectives on what happened, but we leave it up to a third party, the government, to sort of try to figure out the facts of the matter and then adjudicate and say, okay, well, you did this and here's the consequences. I sort of see it as a similar way here, where it's like, okay, if after this, regulatory framework goes into effect, if we have another situation where neighbors are not getting along and there's conflict regarding who said what and who's doing what or whatever, then we have a third party, the city, that can review it and say, okay, I mean, if you're not behaving correctly, social service provider, you're not allowed to operate in our city anymore.
Is that the role of our city government? Is that a useful feature of my tax dollars? Is that necessary? And is that weird to target that toward just social services? Are you going to target that toward other types of industry? Do you require a bar owner or, it's like ironic because it's like, here we have this Mile and Bottoms thing, which again, I'm like generally in favor of because we need revenue and I've made compromises in my own mind with that. But it's like, we can't be involved and, we can't tell them where to be and we need to stay out of it. And it's not for us to worry about the conflict going on there between neighbors and how they're operating and is their tank going to go into the water and what if people get high there and drive away? And it's like, that's not the city's job to be in the weeds with all of that. So we're not worried about a place that's going to sell drugs, but downtown, if a place was going to treat drug addicts, we would be like, we need you to reflect on your behavior. We need you to think deeply about your communication skills. We need you to, so it feels like you're setting up like two modes of government involvement that are based on your for-profit or nonprofit status. And if you are a for-profit and you have a dispute with your neighbor, take it up with the courts, file a lawsuit. If you have a dispute over the size of your fence or something, the city cannot get involved in that. It's like, that's not our job. You need to communicate with one another and you need to engage the legal system if that is what you choose to do. But why in the nonprofit world would you have such a heavy hand and impose regulation to even require that people have an emotional experience about their behavior from a city is weird in some ways if you're not requiring it from for-profit businesses. Or does that make sense? Like, it's just,
yeah,
we're going to leave the weed store alone, but we need to leave the rehab alone too. And if people have justifiable legal reasons that homeless shelter is impacting their property rights or their life rights, or they need to use the channels in our society that kind of meet that out, which is like a legal thing, not really a city as mediator thing.
Yeah, no, I can totally see the double standard that you have presented. Where we disagree is that I don't think that we treat these two entities, for-profit, nonprofit, differently. I think in the way in which you've described it, yes, that's a deeply unfair system and would be inappropriate. However, we do license bars, and right now I have Deanna's on Fifth Avenue where neighbors are complaining constantly to the city about the behavior of the bar owner. And right now, that's in the Fifth Ward, and I'm dealing with mediating, do we take their liquor license? How disruptive do we allow the behavior to be? Okay, somebody was out in the back in the parking lot until 2 a.m. bumping loud music. Is that justifiable to take their liquor license? It happened one time in a month, I mean,
has Rock Island ever put a moratorium on all bars or all vape shops or all, car sales outfits, or like a straight up moratorium, like no bars can operate in the city of Rock Island, or no new bars can operate until we write an ordinance? Or is that a thing that happens?
Yeah, we did it most recently with vape shops. We had a 6-month moratorium on vape shops where no new vape shops could open for 6 months, which is where we got the idea for the 6-month moratorium for the social service providers, is because that's what we do when we decide that there is an activity that needs some regulations. We prohibit that activity opening for 6 months so that we can research and draft new ordinances, and then there's new rules. And like right now, you can't open up a bar. You can't get a liquor license in the city of Rock Island because we've got a cap. And we are at that cap. So no matter what the business is or how good they are, who they are, you cannot get a liquor license in the city of Rock Island for a bar because we're at that cap. And then
is that a wise, I mean, does Rock Island have like a philosophical approach to things like, well, and that'll take us off in the weeds, but I'm just trying to like tie in like some, uniformity of how one thinks through the level of intervention and control you want in a city that's trying to develop. And then it's like city planning, and then there's like control of where things go. But that'll get us way, way distracted. So
I mean, most of it comes from in reaction to public, complaint, discontent, grievance, right? I mean, why did we create new regulations that pretty much ban vape shops in the city of Rock Island? Because people were starting to complain and say, there's vape shops all over the city. You got to do something. And so we created regulations that effectively, limit being new vape shops and new liquor stores and new C-stores and new bars, because people are tired of seeing them in their community. And that's exactly where the homeless shelter regulations came from, is from the public saying, we have an issue here, we have an issue here, we have an issue here, do something. And so then we started doing something quickly about the Mylan Bottoms issue, because I've seen you refer to it elsewhere too. The city is, I hear you about, and we've talked about this, about sort of, we're not centralized planning. We can't, developers choose where they want to develop, and all of that is accurate. However, I don't think that that's being fair to the level of regulatory scrutiny that we are putting that project under, right? I mean, it's not like, well, they got to just be next to the Mylan Bottoms and that's fine. Like, I'm only one member of the city council, so I can't speak for the entire city council, but the Illinois DNR sent the developer a list of like things that they should do to mitigate the effect of the project on turtles, because I know turtles are a big concern for opponents of the project. And it's things like using lighting that conforms to the International Dark Sky Association's standards for not polluting, not doing light pollution. It includes things like oil water separators for the stormwater collection system, like sort of all of these technical engineering things that the DNR recommends, importantly, recommends, not requires, the developer do to mitigate environmental impacts on the project. And I have communicated to city staff that I will not sell that parcel to the developer unless those recommended standards be included in the development agreement for the development. So like if they don't do the oil water separators, then they don't get the reimbursement from the city for the TIF, for example. So I mean, I don't think it's
whether it's vape shops or that development or the homeless shelters, there is a lot of regulation and hoops and things that people in a lot of different industries are jumping through, so to speak. And so you do see some uniformity in that whether it's bars or, that the city, that the trend for Rock Island is to become increasingly like, we are going to require things in order for operations to take place. Like we're going to be involved more so than not be involved. So maybe this thing with the moratorium on homelessness and social service ordinances is following more of a trend line of careful consideration and writing things to, like the garden thing. It's like maybe we're trending toward the city having more involvement with regulating things.
100%. That is very much where my head's at, is that we need more regulatory authority and power within the municipal government, because people are not happy with, we've been hands off for a long time, and people are not happy that there are abandoned houses next to their house where raccoons are getting in. That's why we created the vacant, abandoned, and foreclosed registry, where now if you have an abandoned property in the city of Rock Island, you got to pay $300 every 6 months and register it with the city so that we know who's a point of contact, who owns this property, what are your intentions with the property, because people are sick and tired of living in these neighborhoods where there's abandoned properties all over the place. In the 8 years that I've been on city council, I've been pushing for regulation, control from the city government.
Yeah, and that would be a whole other conversation we could get into, is how how will that approach affect economic development? But to stay on this topic, so
Yes.
I like follow you with all of that, like that the city council we have is taking a more involved approach in order to address concerns. But I think this issue specifically around homelessness, and maybe it's why it's the one that like gets to me so much as a Rock Islander, is that it digs into human rights. It digs into kind of a sort of civil rights.
Yeah.
So, if you think back to the 60s and when Rock Island, when there was the Great Migration South of Black families, and then banks started practicing redlining to say, we don't want Black people in our neighborhood. And that's like a central piece of Rock Island history. It's why you used to have above the hill, below the hill was a government bank, everyone's practice of trying to make sure that certain kinds of people just stayed in certain places. Right. And, in our system now, being poor, people do not have it is so hard to afford rent. The rent for a 1-bedroom in Rock Island County is $913. And so the reason that this ordinance is different than a vape shop or a bar is because the recipients of the services are one group or one class of people. And that what is so disturbing about this thing is that it is targeting a group. So all these other things you're talking about, I got it. Like bar owners next door to each other can't get along. People are not having common courtesy when it comes to their yards. Abandoned buildings are, I get all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. I think what is different about this issue is it's human lives, and it's lives of people who are vulnerable and hurting because of the bigger economic system we live in, and it's kind of like targeted at them. So if this ordinance was for any social service, but that would include a daycare, a mental health, like my business, a mental health practice, a nursing home, a drug rehab, anything. You'd have to like do it uniformly. And so this to me just has civil rights implications. It has human rights implications. And so I get that this ordinance is written to help parts of a community have boundaries with one another, to respect one another, to deepen conversations. And that I think City Council was trying to acknowledge, like, hey, this is going south and we just need to pause. We need to pause so that people can talk to each other. And, but I'm just not sure. I think that's what's different about this issue is at the end of the day, these are like human lives, and one specific group of humans is, if you said women, if you were like, we can't have any more services for women in this area because it's dragging down the neighborhood, that's kind of.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. And this is why I say that both sides have valid points. And this is the very valid point that social service providers and their supporters have, is because we're not just talking about a vape shop, right? We're talking about people's very human needs to be housed. Mm-hmm. And I don't really, this is where I apologize to social service providers and recognize that what we have done and what we are doing has a negative impact on something very important. And take some ownership of treading into an area that is very delicate. And this is why I discount the two people that say close Christian care, right? Because I don't, that's not within my core values. And so as I've communicated, when two people or two parties or whatever have both valid points on both sides, then I try to broker a compromise. And I don't really know. If you can think of a better way to broker a compromise here, I'm all ears. But this is sort of where you just sort of say, yeah, this is really unpleasant, and we're trying to give space for social service providers to exist, but we're also trying to address the concerns that the very real negative impacts that they have on their neighbors. And like the newspaper said on Saturday or 2 Saturdays ago, we're trying to strike a balance. Mm-hmm. And I don't think.
Oh, sorry.
Well, comparing it to redlining, yes, I see similarities. But I don't think that proponents of redlining thought that they were trying to strike a balance. They were just being racist, right? And so, I mean,
Well, it was
I
like
don't know.
these people can be in the community, but they can't live here. And like this business can't open because it's undesirable in the certain social construct of the day. And I
But it's
think
not-
what Rock Island could do, given that we live in a world with increasing wealth inequality, is think about poverty as that type of a social construct and create systems like Nest Cafe, where you have an acknowledgement of this is a place for all people. And we figure out how to do this thing called life together. And so maybe you have a pay what you can grocery store. And there will be people who don't want to go to that, but I would go to it. And a lot of Rock Islanders would go to it. And we'll go to, you can build an identity and economic system and digging into all of that. And then for the business owners who still have really valid concerns, it is just continuing to bring people to the table. Like the third place is going to be such a gift. It's going to solve so many problems, including being a place to organize, to have conversation, to, Christy talked about having a laminated card for every business owner of what to do if you're stuck, if you feel like you don't know how to set a boundary in the moment, or if you need help. It requires the police department to come in and say, we really want you to enforce these types of violations on the street, open containers, defecating in public, breaking into buildings. We really want you to enforce that. But then we're actually going to increase the points of contact. We're going to be strategic. We're going to get people in. I talked to a guy today who's been homeless for 5 weeks. He's at Christian Care. He thinks he'll be out of that in a couple weeks. And it's because he had bronchitis. He's a Teamster, lost his job. He's hoping, 60% of people are a paycheck away from like a devastating financial predicament. And so
I think
Augustana being here and the opportunities for public policy and to be a hub of policy making, poverty policy. AI can take over factories, but it can't take over some of the difficult human work of like, how do we care for one another in a shifting landscape? So while some people in the community are focused on bringing factories and industrial stuff, there are others of us who are like, how do we address the human condition? How do we create an app that, helps someone, I don't know, in some social way? I haven't thought of the ideas yet, but I feel like we need to lean into this in a way that other of our sister cities haven't, because they're just like, this is just a burden. It's a straight up burden. Get it out of here. And I think we have to tell a better story. And I guess my hope, you're one of the leaders of my city, is that you tell a more inspiring story about who these people are, and that we just work harder to. I've offered like 3 times. I mean, I am like a trained therapist with a lot of technical and experiential knowledge to help broker some of these relationships. But nobody takes me up on it. I can only people who have no power will talk to me. No one with power will talk to me except you and Ashley.
I'm talking to you.
But you know what I mean? It's I think we could it's just hearing people. It's like, business owner A, what is your deepest fear or concern? And then how do we make sure that you are taken care of? Because they have a right to their boundaries around safety, security, what they personally feel capable of responding to in the moment. They have a right to their boundaries, and we need to help them feel equipped. You can't leave them by themselves. And I think business owners have felt, after COVID, all the construction, the problem with the winter shelter last year. I mean, I think part of this is just acknowledging that they've been through a lot. And, this wraparound, we need to be listening and responding and coming up with solutions. But I just have a problem with it being done on homeless people and kind of in violation of their rights. It's like all the work that needs to be done, awesome. If you want to regulate some things around safety or quality, great. But to say humans in a community cannot care for people because they are unhoused, and you're going to limit my ability to like feed someone, it's just weird. It's like not Rock Island. I don't know.
I hear you. I think I I agree with a lot of what you said. The city council unanimously supports the third place, and I was looking forward to them opening. I don't know of a single member of the city council that wants the third place to not open. Yes, I acknowledge that there's the moratorium that may delay them, but like unanimously, the city council wants the third place to open. My concern, and when what I hear lacking from your comments, is two things. One, a sort of a presumption that concerns regarding social service providers and the unhoused is purely social constructs, right? Like we just don't want these, the visible homelessness, like you're talking about, oh, I don't want all of these unsightly people wandering around, right? And that's again not what people communicate to me. It is things like security, safety, hygiene, things like that. And then two, like I'm sure that the third place will be an asset for our downtown and obviously the unhoused population, but I'm very curious what the residents of Du Marché right next door of the third place are going to be experiencing at 4:30, 30 minutes after they close on a Tuesday. I notice that there's a tendency by social service providers and their supporters to just brush over. Yeah, well, that might be a concern, but it's not, no, but that's an actual concern that my constituents bring up, that they close at 4 o'clock and then they're in their backyard and they're in their garbage can and they're on their front door and it just feels like proponents of social service providers. I get so frustrated, and now I'm sharing my feelings when Ron Lunn from Project Now comes to the city council and says, we acknowledge that our operations have an impact on the surrounding community, but then don't go any further to actually own it, right? There's a real aversion, and I get it, because providers don't want to feed the negative narratives that exist about serving the poor and that they're a magnet for bad stuff, and I understand that, but when you're talking to people who have been negatively impacted by this, there is a deep frustration, distrust, and frankly the reason that we're where we are today by asking the government to get involved, because there's truly not a sense that social service providers take ownership for the impacts that they have. And so I know it. Give it a month, on a Tuesday at 4:30, I'm going to get a phone call from somebody from Du Marché, and it's going to be, why did you let this place open? You knew that they would be closed at 4 o'clock, and now they're in my backyard.
So I feel like that brings up so many cool things that we could all get together. I'm an optimist, Dylan, but we are doing a social experiment, and so sometimes with that you have a hypothesis. You can prepare for it. You can talk to Du Marché, you can, and then you do the data. I would volunteer to go hang out and take some video or talk to people and see what happens at 4:30. We think this is going to be a hard spot. And having run businesses my whole life, the flexibility for mistake making and for people to be human and for things to go wrong and then to work together to come up with a better system and to not be punishing and you didn't get this right, so now it's over, I think is why I've been a successful leader of people, is because never will you get from me oh, you really fucked that up, and so it's over, you're out of here. It's always how do we use this stumble to deepen and make better whatever process we're in? So, but didn't Project Now give everyone their cell phone number and say you can call us and we'll be there within 15 minutes? That's a pretty big response from okay, here's my little 5-second thing on that. This shelter opened in an emergency. It was last minute. Thank God for the city of Rock Island, the county of Rock Island, Project Now for pulling it together. It didn't go perfectly, but how could it? It's the first time a city's doing something, and you saved people's lives probably. You probably saved a life. The whole city of Rock Island did. Did stuff go wrong? Was there miscommunication? Was it? Of course, but it happened so quickly. And it seems like in the aftermath of that, when it became apparent, hey, we're not talking to each other enough, and there are hurt feelings and there's conflict, people did reach out, meet with each other, talk. I didn't Project Now give their phone numbers to everyone and said, call us. Well, someone from our senior leadership will be there within 15 minutes if you have an issue.
Yes, I'm glad that you brought up Project Now because the sensitivity to the third place opening and the expecting bad things from it is not coming out of nowhere or just some sort of anti-poor people discriminatory sentiment from the downtown community, right? This is a fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me sort of a situation that the third place is walking into, which is unfortunate for them, but I mean, there is a level, you hear it from my constituents when I talk to them, you hear it from me, where it's like, okay, we're kind of tired of being told that we'll make adjustments and we'll improve, but then it doesn't happen. And
We only tried it one time. I mean, we only did it once. Everyone
well, yes,
done it for like decades.
that's fair, and that's why again we are open to the third place opening, right? We haven't drawn a firm boundary and said no, you can't come in here. We're like, okay, we're going to trust you. We're very nervous about this, and your neighbors are all very nervous about this, but we're going to trust you here. I mean, we are letting them I know they've been delayed, but they're going to open, and I think that needs to be acknowledged. But
I don't think they know if they're going to open, because if the ordinance isn't written, how can they open? And maybe it'll be really cold. Are you guys thinking about doing an exemption for them for the moratorium? That would be awesome.
Some are. I'm not convinced that that's a good idea, but I mean, I can pretty much say that the third place will be open, right? I know that there's all this conspiracy that the city is trying to trip them up and blah, 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 but like, no, we're pretty good with them opening. I mean, we are good with them opening. That frustrates me again because people create their own narratives and assign it to the city's actions that aren't there, but it is what it is. People's perceptions are their perceptions. However, getting back to the Project Now situation, yes, Project Now met with business owners and neighbors regarding how the emergency shelter went. And yes, they gave them their phone number. However, two things. One, have you ever tried to get a hold of Project Now and get any sort of, like, if you need something from Project Now, have you ever had success in getting that done in a timely manner?
So I've never personally needed Project Now, but I have assisted people to try to get something from Project Now. And I can admit that it sometimes has been a lengthy or frustrating process around rent assistance or, so totally, I hear what you're saying. So you're saying
I'm a landlord. I have 2 rental properties, and one of my tenants got behind on rent, and I worked with them with Project Now's eviction diversion program because I did not want to evict my tenant, and it was not a good experience from working with Project Now. It was endless. Like, I had to follow up with them. Hey, where are we? What do you need from my tenant? What do you need from me? I mean, it was just not a very good, many things. I mean, it was even like, oh, your tenant's application came in the mail, but it was left at the front desk and nobody checked it. And so I had to go down there and physically look for it. And, oh, I found it in some shelving unit that it wasn't supposed to be there. But anyway, I found it now. And so we can process it. It was just like, what operational management is going on within that organization? So, I mean, sure, they showed up and said, well, give us a call and we'll be here in 15 minutes. I just have never found Project Now to be very good at actually doing what they're good at putting on a housing summit, and they're good at putting on a rooting out poverty conference annually. But as far as like actually timely getting work done, there's room for improvement. And I appreciate them saying that, but the actual execution is questionable. And then 2, again, it was in the newspaper 2 weeks ago, that Saturday story, big story about balancing homeless needs in downtown Rock Island. I was quoted and referenced extensively in that article. Dwight Ford was quoted and cited extensively in that article. And Mr. Ford explicitly said, I do not agree with Dylan, specifically that I am articulating the position of some of these neighbors that met with Project Now. This is the diversion.
You were on their board until like 2 weeks ago. So there's a lot of layers of like conflict and interconnectedness, and it's wild.
I'm very aware. I've been living it. But the diversion here and the challenge is that there are two perceptions on how those meetings went. Yes, Project Now met with downtown business owners who were expressing concern about the impacts that their operations were having on their business and their home, people breaking in. Again, it's not just like there's a homeless guy in my front doorway. It's like somebody literally following my customers into the business and harassing them or whatever, right? But the perception of how those meetings went is where this separates completely. And Project Now believes that the people with whom they met had nice meetings and were good with how they gave them their card. They said, call us in 15 minutes. And in Project Now's perception, the business owners followed up and said, we thank you very much. That was a good meeting. Roo, roo, roo. We love you. You know, the communication that I have received from these very same business owners is not that story.
Yeah.
It is a story of having felt bullied in those meetings, of having their concerns feeling dismissed and ignored, and just sort of, well, call us in 15 minutes, but then, you know, not actually following up, right? And I can't help it if Project Now refuses so much as like kicking me off of their board to acknowledge that other people don't have the same perception as how they do about how those meetings went. But the fact of the matter is, I had this conversation in a board meeting at Project Now where I was like, your neighbors do not have the same sentiment as you do about how these meetings went. And one of the board members said, where's your source? And I said, they're my constituents. I directly talk to them. They are calling me and sharing this, right? And so, I mean, this is the challenge.
It does get really challenging though, because the way that shelter came together, you would anticipate problems. And we're coming off the heels of COVID, and there's a bunch of construction downtown. So there's like a boiling pot of tension and stress in the downtown in general. And then you drop this into the middle of it. But the city was kind of lockstep with, yes, we're going to have the shelter here. You know, so the city was part of setting this up. Mm-hmm. I mean, the city has just as much responsibility for that as Project Now, who opened the doors. And you know, and I've heard them, similar to you, saying, I'm sorry, I know this had an impact on you. It's having an impact on you, businesses that are trying to open. I've heard Project Now in city council meetings really do a mea culpa. Like, we understand this didn't go as well as it could have. We understand that there was a lack of communication. If we ever had to do this well, we'd work harder with. So it's like everybody had missteps, like everybody stumbled. But what I hear you saying is that you're concerned about the ongoing communication or the ongoing ability of social service providers in the downtown area to communicate effectively, and for business owners to communicate with them and to come up with like a team approach to how do we work together to address homelessness and people suffering in our downtown area. And that seems like the bigger issue. That's really the bigger issue. But
I mean, I agree. And I frankly, I do not trust an organization to be able to operate something as potentially impactful on their neighbors as a homeless shelter that has not demonstrated to me a willingness to I mean, yes, they say things like, we understand that our operations had an impact on neighbors, but then when you're like, well, your neighbors are upset, they're like, that didn't happen.
Well, I'm trying to get, but it's so hard because there's so many things floating around. Like there was poop in the library, you know, so I'm trying to like, can someone tell me how much poop was in the library? Because you hear that and you're like, and I asked you that, like 365 days a year, was there poop in the library, or did this happen 2 times? Like, how do we trying to hear this story and understand the intensity of the problems? Something I do with my husband all the time, because we used to have conflict, because like I would be more worried about something that like one of the kids having a balloon in their mouth. I would be like, the kid is going to die. And my husband would be like, he's fine. So, you know, we had this very different activation level around safety.
Right.
He's way more laid back than I am. And one thing that really helped us is I'd be like, on a scale of 0 to 10, like how freaked out are you? And oftentimes I would be an 8 and he would be like a -1. And that helped us to talk about it, because we were recognizing that our original position was I was really activated and he wasn't. You know, he felt calm and I was like, the sky is falling. So for an issue like the poop in the library, was that like, how big of an issue was that? How many times did someone smear feces on the walls of the library?
I don't know the answer to that question. However, I like, talking about the intensity of how people, I mean, again, I don't know like a numerical value at which my constituents felt the intensity of this. However, I can tell you that they felt it intensely enough, those conversations that they had with Project Now and the feelings that they took away from those conversations were sufficiently intense to say, City of Rock Island, you need to intervene in here. You need to create some regulations to limit this behavior. You need to create some sort of accountability mechanism because we do not trust Project Now. We do not trust social service providers to be able to be good neighbors. And so, like, I think what's happening here is that Project Now or social service providers, again, are like your husband, right? Where they're just like, yeah, things happen. Maybe somebody pooped in the library once, but it's not the end of the world, right? But then maybe neighbors or library employees are at like an 8, and they're like, this is a really big problem. And so the city is trying to intervene on behalf of the person that's experiencing the 8 anxiety related to the situation. And unfortunately, what has frustrated me is that social service providers, the people experiencing the -1, have not sat back and thought, oh, these people are experiencing an 8 because of something that I'm doing. And even though that was not my intention, and even though I thought I tried to do my best to do this well, they're still experiencing an 8, and they're extremely anxious and upset about what's going on here. So I can empathize with them, and I can understand why the city is doing what it's doing. And I'm going to work with my neighbors and work with the city as much as I can to try to make this comfortable for everybody involved. Instead, they got defensive, considered what was happening an assault on them, and started fighting like hell, which again, I understand that perspective, and I understand all of the valid points that you make about human rights and civil rights and the dignity of human life and all of that. But I really get frustrated that the social service providers did not acknowledge that their neighbors were at an 8 and could not understand why the city would feel like we should intervene on behalf of these people that were experiencing 8s, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. Like, I think we've talked before. I had a friend, little tiny lady. You'll know who I'm talking about, but there was someone living in the building and followed her into the bathroom. And, that person has every right within their own person and body to have an experience of an 8 or a 10. And this person was obviously that followed her was not well. And, so a business owner, a resident downtown has a right to feel safe in their body, to move freely and with safety in their city. So I 100% agree with that. And the solution is not to just ignore the concerns of the business owners or to say those fears aren't valid and you don't deserve to feel safe in your own city, because of course you do. I guess what I feel like I'm getting to why this is so frustrating, because there is a fundamental conversation going on over here about human rights. My right to use the restroom and feel safe,
Yep.
but also a person who's unhoused or experiencing a mental health crisis, to have their own human rights. So
Yep.
there's this human rights thing. And then there's like all this ego and power and counsel and going on over here, which is like personalities and, and I would say that that a model, we need to somehow flush out these conversations, model them for our community, do something more creative around letting us in. Like I would facilitate it for you, but I probably have too strong of opinions on this particular issue. But I know other people who would videotape this. Let's show in Rock Island what is possible when people do politics in a different way, because without that, the business owners will feel their way. The homeless population will have no voice. Social service providers will go back to their silo. Like, see if we can get some buy-in. Because I emailed the Downtown Alliance to say, like, I will do this. Like, I will come in and facilitate, do it all for free. And it was like, no, we don't really want, business owners might think that's weird, or it was kind of gatekeeping. Like, you can't have access to these people. Even though I think I could keep things private and,
Yeah.
I'm not saying it has to be me, but I think what you're talking about is a system that has lost its ability to communicate. And just like in a marriage, when two people have lost their ability to communicate, sometimes they need outside help.
Yep.
And I'm just curious, like, if you take this back to council, like, you and I probably aren't going to vote the same. If I had a vote, we probably at the end of the day after this conversation might not vote the same. But what I'm
Yeah.
hearing is we have this human rights issue running parallel to a communication ego issue. And
Yes.
there's collateral damage to that. And this whole ordinance, all this stuff around homelessness is being written into, in order to try to deal with this other thing, which is that parts of societies don't know how to talk to each other and don't know how to write together. It would be better to have like a downtown homelessness response team made up of different, kind of parts of that response, and to come up with like you could put stickers in your window if you're a certain level of acceptance to the homeless community. You could say you can use a bathroom here if you see a little purple circle, like come on in. But if you see a different color circle, this is for paying customers only. And it could be discreet, but the homeless population would get turned on to that very fast. They would figure out the system. I'm just thinking creatively, and I'm totally baffled. But
no. I appreciate it. I will say the Rock Island Downtown Alliance has had a livability committee for years now, where they have convened the different social service providers in downtown, the ambassadors that work with the street outreach team, that have had these very conversations. And so, like,
have they been facilitated by someone who has systems and theory and training underneath effective mediation or negotiation, or how to frame things so that people can show up with vulnerability, so that they're not there listening with all their private feelings and then walking away not feeling heard, not feeling respected, not, I think if you get 10 people in a room who only know how to do community work based on the status quo or what they see in the bigger world, how are we going to make it more effective to wrestle through this stuff together as a community without maybe some different setup or approaches? Like, I've been to a million chamber of commerce meetings. I've been to a million poverty summits and board meetings, and they're not humanly relational in the way that they need to be. I'm sure you agree. It's like, let's all, there's no, I don't know.
I completely agree. And I cited at the very beginning of our conversation, attending the Illinois Municipal League annual conference this past week, and a session that was put on by a marketing or a PR firm that talked about their services that they can offer municipalities in navigating a controversial issue. If like the case study that they presented was some village near Chicago, and they were doing some economic development work, and residents were concerned it was going to be too high dense development. They wanted less dense. And so the city hired this PR firm to have neighborhood dialogues where people were able to share their feelings and their thoughts, and the city got a lot of good information. And maybe we're having a conversation about density, but actually somebody wants to talk, their feelings are actually about food insecurity or whatever, and so, like, my point is that I took away from that, and I take away from our continued conversations, that perhaps, yes, the next time we anticipate a controversial issue coming before the city council, we can probably do a little bit more work ahead of time in facilitating more dialogue within stakeholders. The challenge with that, of course, is that unless you and others are willing to do this pro bono, that marketing firm that was giving the presentation at the IML conference does not do it pro bono. And, we don't have enough money to fix our streets, let alone hire PR firms out of Chicago to facilitate neighborhood dialogues. So
I can't do it as a full-time job, but I think you have lots of talented resources within your own community. Try it. Like, maybe it won't be to the level that everyone thinks it needs to be, but why not try it? Why not? We have St. Ambrose, we have Augustana College, we have really great institutions that can come in probably for free, or I'd be for free, but I'm too opinionated, so I don't know if I'm a good fit. But
maybe not on this issue,
on a different issue, but I could do it on this issue and hold back my feelings for the moment. But even the 4:30 stuff is letting out, what are we going to do? Anticipating a problem coming down the road and getting people together to talk about it up front. You know, clarifying expectations that we have of one another that we might not be able to meet, kind of determining who in the system is going to be responsible for which piece. You know, if a person is violent on the street, that's not really the responsibility of any social service agency, because they're not equipped to respond to that in a lawful way. Like,
Right.
it's
That's the
hard.
police.
Yeah, that's the police. So do you have to pick up a kid at 3?
Not anymore. I was about to, but I don't have to
Okay.
anymore. Thank you. Thank you for remembering that.
Yeah, I know. My mom is going to get mine. So I was like, I don't know, I could be talking forever, but just, I feel like I love Rock Island so much. And I think that part of our identity and our development can be in the very things that we think are plaguing us, you know, in these very
Yeah,
difficult,
I agree.
and that fighting about it on Facebook is horrible, because it's like, but I'll do it, you know, I'll show up. I'm gonna be there. But
Me too.
we have all these awesome people in our community who are so loving and concerned, and, you know, and we have people trying to build things, and they want their businesses to be nice, and they want to up the profile of the, you know, there's like so much good intention and good stuff going on. It's just needing better spaces to wrestle with our democracy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we're doing it right now, and your project with the Rock Island line is an example of that. Even the newspaper article in the Dispatch Argus Quad City Times 2 weeks ago, and the editorial this past weekend. I mean, we are having these dialogues. It's there's a lot of people not having dialogues and just lobbing grenades and arguing with each other on Facebook, but there are people having dialogues, and you are one of them, and I appreciate that very much. I also try to do this. Anytime anybody reaches out to me, I'm writing a 3-page email, or
Yeah.
sitting for a 3-hour interview or something like that. But we could do better at facilitating dialogue, and I hope through conversations like this we can role model this for people as well.
Yeah. And that I feel very, you know, positively towards you. So we can talk about negative things. I feel like being Midwestern nice also comes with this difficulty of, like, you can't say anything bad, you know, and so it stops us maybe from talking about the hard stuff.
Yeah.
And also, like, if they keep the ordinance in place, if they keep the 1,000-foot, you know, I would be a part of the community that would be like trying to rally people to bring a lawsuit against the city for a violation of human rights. But I'd still like you, but I would just have to, that's democracy, right? We use the levers we have. We try to tell a different story. We engage the legal system. We do all these different things, but we don't have to hate each other while we do it. It's like, I disagree with some things that have happened. I don't get my way all the time, but I keep fighting for it, you know?
Yeah, well, I think the two of us deeply value community. You demonstrated through your podcast. I demonstrated through my service on city council, and that is what allows us to stay in community with one another when we disagree. Is we value. I like dialoguing with you. I like emailing with you. I like interviewing with you. I like your thoughts. I like reading your blog. I like listening to your interviews, because there's a shared core value here of community. And I'm not willing to sacrifice the relationship that I have with you because I disagree with you. I don't think that you're an idiot or a jerk or whatever because we disagree on this subject. In fact, I think that you have many, many valid points in the positions that you've taken on this, and I can respect that. Now, again, yes, we may disagree on the final public policy being proposed here, but ultimately, like I said in that email, I hope and I believe that we're able to come away with mutual understanding, or at least more so than what we had, and still remain in community with one another, respecting each other, even though we disagree.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think every time I've talked to you about this, my takeaway is feeling compassion for business owners or for people who have had scary things happen or have felt a sense of unsafety in their own body or in the stability of their livelihood. And I do have compassion for that. And I want to both protect people who are unhoused and view them as resources and very valuable parts of our community.
Mhm.
And I want businesses, I'm an entrepreneur, like I want businesses to thrive. And I even told a friend whose friend is downtown, I don't think we see eye to eye. I'm like, give that person my phone number. Like if they were having a problem and nobody would respond to it, I'd come try to help. You know, I wouldn't know what I was doing, but I want the downtown businesses to thrive. I want them to be feeling good too. Yeah, so.
Well, we appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate you. I know my fingers were tired from typing out all the back and forth with you on different people's Facebook threads. So thought
it happens. This has been a very nice conversation, but much better than emailing and Facebooking.
Well, you get lost too, because you're like, wait, was he replying to me or that other stranger? I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And yeah, if you ever find yourself needing some sort of support, like a therapeutic, like how can we get these two people to have a way of communicating that might leave them both feeling more like a team, or like they can live amongst one another.
Neighbors.
Neighbors. Yeah. So
I will do that.
All right. Thanks, Dylan. Now is the hard part where I turn this off and pray to God that it actually captured our conversation and that I can put it out somehow. So
well, fingers crossed for you. I appreciate you recording it and sharing it.
Yeah. All right. I will talk to you soon. I don't think we came to any agreement about anything, but we're probably still wouldn't vote the same, but we are still connected in our community.
I agree entirely.
Yeah. All right. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye, Annika.
Bye.